Subscribe my YouTube channel, Jax's Revenge Domain. Someone get the truck driver a coffee while the adults finish talking. That's what he said. Loud enough for the room. Loud enough for the lapel mic. Loud enough for the 3 cameras running live feed to investors, to the board archive, to everyone watching the leadership transition of Harwick Industrial Holdings from their offices that morning. I had my hand out ready to greet the incoming CEO. Brent Holloway, chairman of the board, looked at my hand, looked at the flowers I was holding, looked at my shoes, work boots, not dress shoes, and made his decision in about 2 seconds flat. He never looked at my face first. My name is Aaron Callahan. I'm 54 years old. I'm the founding partner of Rejoint Capital, a private holding firm based in Columbus, Ohio. And what I'm about to tell you is how 1 sentence, 11 words spoken into a hot mic in a Cincinnati boardroom ended up costing Brent Holloway his job, his reputation, and $2.1 billion in committed capital before lunch. But to understand why that number matters, you need to understand how I got into that room in the first place. Harwick Industrial Holdings had been on our radar for about 8 months. They were a mid-size conglomerate, contract manufacturing, logistics, a warehouse network across 5 states, solid footprint, decent client base, the kind of company that should have been printing money. Instead, they were bleeding. Their outgoing CEO had spent 4 years treating the balance sheet like a shopping list. Acquisition after acquisition, each one announced with a press release and a handshake's photo. None of them integrated properly. He'd stacked debt on top of debt, cut operational headcount instead of executive overhead, and smoothed over every quarterly miss with phrases like transitional headwinds and strategic repositioning. The banks had started calling. Vendors were tightening terms. The market had stopped believing the story. By the time Harwick came to us, they needed 2 things: a serious capital injection and a leadership reset. Ridgepoint was prepared to provide the capital. They were promising to deliver the reset. The deal we structured was $2.1 billion in total committed capital, a syndicated arrangement with Ridgepoint as lead tunch, meaning our commitment was the load-bearing piece. Without it, the other institutional partners couldn't proceed as structured. Most wouldn't proceed at all. Harwick would appoint a new CEO with a mandate to stabilize operations and clean house. The board would adopt governance reforms to prevent another acquisition spree. Clean and straightforward on paper. My co-partner Reed had pushed to send one of our VPs to the closing session. Said it was routine, ceremonial even. Just show up, shake hands, let the lawyers finish. I told him I'd go myself. There's a reason for that. 2 years before Harwick, I committed to a deal without being in the room. A $600 million injection into a regional infrastructure firm. I trusted the chairman's track record. I delegated to my second in command. 3 days before closing, a video went public. The chairman standing in front of a company town hall, pointing at a line worker, calling him replaceable trash. Laughing about it, the crowd laughed too. We still closed, we shouldn't have. The next 18 months were regulatory headaches, union grievances, and my firm's name attached to a company that treated its workers like equipment that needed replacing. We got our return eventually, but the cost in time and reputation wasn't worth the number on paper. I promised myself it wouldn't happen again. So into every deal after that, I put a clause. We didn't call it legal language, we called it the respect clause. Simple terms. If during negotiations or closing, any senior leadership at the target company engaged in documented conduct that materially harmed the company's reputational standing, Ridgepoint could withdraw its commitment immediately. No penalty, no delay, no renegotiation window. Capital off the table. Harwick's board had reviewed it. Their outside counsel had reviewed it. Holloway himself had signed off on the term sheet that included it. He just didn't think it was about him. People like Holloway never do. The morning of the meeting, I flew into Cincinnati, changed at the airport lounge, and took a car to Harwick's headquarters. Glass tower downtown. The kind of building with a stock ticker in the lobby and a promo reel of smiling warehouse workers on the wall that nobody who works in the warehouse ever actually sees. The receptionist FA, her nameplate said, gave me the standard smile. Welcome to Harwick Name. Aaron Callahan here for the board session. Her fingers stopped on the keyboard. Half a second pause. The kind people don't notice unless they've learned to look for it. I've learned to look for it. A few minutes later, Cole Rafferty from Investor Relations came down to escort me up. Young guy, good suit, rehearsed small talk, asked about my flight. I asked about the mood upstairs. Eager, he said, and a little anxious. The elevator opened to softer carpet, quieter halls. We passed framed photos of past CEOs cutting ribbons at facilities they no longer owned. Stopped outside double-glass doors, 2 cameras mounted above them, red lights off for the webcast. Cole said, "Leadership wanted transparency today." I thought of the clause. "Good," I said. Inside the boardroom looked like someone had ordered successful corporate from a catalogue. Long polished table, high-backed leather chairs, 1 full wall of glass overlooking downtown Cincinnati. The opposite wall lined with presentation screens already primed and waiting. And on a credenza in the corner, a flower arrangement, white lies, eucalyptus. The invoice for those had come through Rejoint. Harwick had asked us to sponsor refreshments and decor for the event. The order had been placed under my name. Cole picked them up and handed them to me when I pointed it out. "Optics," he said quietly. They wanted the room to feel warm. I took the flowers and held them. Warm wasn't the word I'd use for what came next. Brent Holloway was already at the head of the table. Early 60s. Silver hair, good suit, the kind of tan you get from a lot of time on a golf course and not much time in a factory. He noticed the flower arrangement before he noticed me. Told me to set it on the sideboard. I said I'd hold it. He gave me the look you give someone who doesn't understand where they stand and turned back to his conversation. Nobody introduced me, no nameplate at the table. No, this is the managing partner from Rejoint Capital. They saw the flowers, the work boots, no familiar face from their usual bank rotation, and they made their decision fast. Support staff background. I walked around the table toward Owen Carver, the incoming CEO. Late 30s, good haircut, eyes that looked tired in the way of someone who'd spent 2 weeks in back-to-back prep sessions. He looked up as I came around. I set the flowers at the table's edge, freed my right hand, and extended it toward him. "Welcome to Harwick," I said. "I'm Aaron." Before Owen could move, Holloway swiveled his chair our way. He clocked my hand, clocked the gesture, clocked an opportunity. He leaned slightly toward his lapel mic. Put on the smile you use when you want the room to laugh with you, and said it clearly enough for every camera in the room. "Someone get the truck driver a coffee while the adults finish talking." The reaction was immediate. A board member to his right chuckled too fast. The kind of laugh that's more reflex than humor. An operations executive near the far end made a sound caught between a laugh and a cough. The communications guy in the back turned his face away and looked at the floor. Nate Farwell. I'd find out his name later. He knew exactly how that clip was going to sound on replay. Owen's eyes went from my hand to Holloway, then down to the agenda in front of him. He didn't say anything. Didn't move his hand. Didn't say that's out of line. He just found something interesting in his printed deck and stayed there. I didn't drop my hand right away, kept it out for a second or two. Holloway's smile thinned. His eyes moved to my face, checking. I think whether I was too slow to understand the hierarchy he just announced to everyone in the room and everyone watching the stream. I lowered my hand on my own time, walked to the empty seat at the far end of the table. No nameplate. Good. They'd written my role out of the script entirely. They were about to find out what that cost. "Let's begin," Holloway said, turning to the main screen. The first slide came up. Harwick Industrial Holdings Leadership Transition and Capital Structure Update. He launched into opening remarks like a man who'd done this kind of thing 100 times. Talked about strategic vision, long-term shareholder value, a new chapter for the company. He used the word partnership 4 times in 3 minutes and didn't once mention the firm that was providing the largest single piece of capital in the deal. I listened, watched the room, watched who laughed at his jokes a half beat too fast, watched who kept their eyes on their notes instead of the screen, watched Perry Aldrich, the lead independent director, who hadn't laughed at the truck driver line and hadn't looked away from it either. As the second slide came up, transaction overview, I spoke. "Before you go further," I said loud enough to cut through. "There's something the room needs to know. Holloway turned. The look on his face was the look of a man who'd forgotten there was someone at the far end of the table. "We're not taking comments from staff during the session," he said, the amusement still in his voice. "You can leave notes with investor relations afterward." I met his eyes. "If you're not willing to say hello to the person across from you," I said, "then by tomorrow morning, 2.1 billion will no longer be part of this deal." The room didn't gasp. Boardrooms don't gasp. They go quiet in a way that feels physical, like the air pressure changes. Phones stopped moving. Pens stopped. The eyes shifted sideways without anyone wanting to be caught looking. Someone laughed after a beat. Too loud, forced. "All right," a director said. "Let's keep this professional." Holloway's smile came back thinner. "Save the theatrics," he said. "Capital is being handled." "I am the capital," I said. He stared at me for a long moment. Then Lance Mercer, the CFO, cleared his throat from the middle of the table. "We still need direct confirmation from the capital provider," Lance said carefully. "Legal can't substitute for that release. It requires the authorized signatory." Holloway's eyes moved from Lance to me, slowly. The way you look at something when your brain is still running the numbers on whether what you're seeing is actually what you're seeing. "You're saying you control the funds," he said. Not a question, more like a man checking whether he'd misread a contract. "I'm the managing partner at Rejoint Capital, authorized to release the full commitment," I said. "All of it." Perry Aldrich shut his pen down. "All 2.1 billion. "All of it," I said. "And without Ridgepoint's tranche, the remaining institutional commitments can't proceed as structured. The syndication collapses. Most of the other partners won't move independently." The silence that followed was a different kind. Not shock, recalibration. The sound of people quietly revising the map of the room they thought they were sitting in. Holloway, straightened in his chair, tried to find the rhythm again. "Then perhaps we should restart properly," he said, "now that roles are clear." "Perhaps," I said. The room knew. Even if nobody said it out loud, the dynamic that Holloway had walked in with, the one where he was the gravity everything else orbited, wasn't the one anyone was leaving with. He just didn't know yet how fast it was about to move. They pushed forward into the deck like nothing had shifted. That's what people do when they don't yet believe consequences are real. You keep moving. You act like the ground is still solid. You hope the moment passes. It didn't pass. Lance brought up the respect clause about 10 minutes later. He didn't announce it. He just tapped the folder in front of him and said there was one item still to acknowledge before they moved to the capital release section. Holloway didn't look up from the screen. "We've covered everything, months of review, the conduct provision." Lance said that got everyone's attention. A director flipped pages. Perry Aldrich leaned forward. "Which one?" someone asked. Lance rated straight from the document. Reputational conduct, capital withdrawal rights, documented impact threshold, no penalty clause, clear language, no room for interpretation. Owen Carver looked up from his deck for the first time since the truck driver comment. "What does that mean exactly? Documented conduct." "It means," Perry said, reading further down, "it doesn't require intent, just impact and documentation." He didn't look at the cameras when he said it. He didn't have to. This was standard boilerplate. Holloway said his voice had an edge now that hadn't been there before. It was revised. Lance said Ridgepoint requested specific language changes during the second round of term sheet negotiations. At my insistence, I said. Holloway turned to me. "You were worried about optics." "I was worried about behavior," I said. He let out a short breath. "The kind that's not quite a scoff, but wants to be. Nobody's misbehaving. We're having a business meeting." Perry looked up toward the camera mounted in the upper corner of the room. "Red light on. Still recording." "This meeting is being documented," he said. "Careful word, not recorded." "Documented for transparency," Holloway said like that settled it. "Yes," I said, "for transparency." That was the moment he lost the room. Not loudly. Nobody stood up. Nobody pointed a finger. But I watched it happen. The quiet reorientation of every person at that table away from Brent Holloway and toward their own exposure. The lawyers in their heads were already working. When the recess was called 15 minutes later, chairs moved fast. People stepped out in clusters, phones already in hand. I stayed seated for a moment, watched who left together, watched who kept distance from Holloway, watched Nate Farwell from communications walk out alone and not look back. Then I stood, left the flowers on the floor, and walked into the hall. The corridor was cooler, quieter. 2 directors stood near the window talking low, and both of them stopped when I passed. Holloway was already on his phone 10 FT away, not bothering to lower his voice. "It's just posturing," he said into the phone. "We'll walk him back in. He's not going to blow up a deal this size over a joke." I kept walking, found a quiet spot near the service elevator, took out my phone. 1 number. Reed picked up on the second ring. "Activate the withdrawal," I said, full amount effective immediately. A pause. Short. All of it. All of it. Reason code. Conduct during negotiations. Documentation is live on 3 camera feeds right now. Understood. Executing. The line went quiet. I slipped the phone into my pocket and stood there for a moment. My breathing was the same as when I'd walked in. My hands were steady. That's how I've always known when a decision is right. Not because it feels good, but because it feels settled, like something that was already true finally got said out loud. I thought about my father for a second, not the things he said. I've quoted those enough. I thought about his hands, the way they looked at the end of a shift, scarred, calloused, stained with work that didn't wash off completely. He shook every man's hand the same way. The plant manager, the guy running the wire feed next to him, the kid showing up his first day. Same grip, same eye contact, same good to meet you. He'd have understood why I was standing in that hallway. I walked back into the boardroom. The red light on the camera was still on. The room was doing its best impression of normal. Chairs back in, water poured. Voices kept light and controlled. Holloway looked up when I took my seat. His eyes said he'd already decided he'd handled it. "Let's get back on track," he said. The edge was gone. Smooth again. Man in charge. The deck came back on screen. Projections, cash flow models, timelines, all of it built on a number that no longer existed, though nobody in the room knew that yet, except me. Lance's phone buzzed first. He looked at the screen. Something changed in his face. Not fast, not dramatic, just a slow draining. He read it again. Then a second notification landed. Another phone buzzed. Then another. A low, staggered sequence around the table. "Let's silence devices," Holloway said sharply. "We're mid-session." Lance didn't move to silence his. He stared at the screen. Then he looked up the primary trench. He said. His voice was flat, controlled. The voice of a man delivering bad news to a room that doesn't know it's bad yet. It's been withdrawn. The room didn't react immediately. People looked at their own phones first, like they needed to verify it from their own feed. "Withdrawn how?" Holloway said. "We're in the middle of closing. Executed." Lance said confirmed full amount $2.1 billion. That's not possible. A director said it like saying it would make it less true.